So we're out here on the range in New Mexico. Really no road access. We walked in, and here we find an old homestead. There's a date in the rock of 1923. Interesting method of construction here. What you have is essentially hand chiseled solid stone walls that are just built up, and then as you can see up there, there's a layer of large tree trunks called vigas laid from one side to the other. Then you build up a parapet wall above the vigas, and then originally on top of the vigas there would have essentially been a roof of about 12 inches of compacted soil. So the entire structure, with the exception of the window framing, the door framing, and so forth, is actually built directly from the land. These stones are the stones that were gathered within 50 feet of the construction site. There's no purchased roofing. There's no purchased really interior framing. The logs there are ponderosa logs that would have come from farther down the canyon. So it's pretty much straight built from the land, probably with the exception of, I'd say, less than would have been a wagon load of lumber that would have been bought in at Mosquero at the rail depot. So let's go inside and have a look. Coming inside these structures is interesting because you can see on the outside the stone joints had been mortared in with ordinary cement mortar, which probably was done somewhat after the building was constructed. But on the interior, you can see that the actual construction method is rocks that are strictly laid in mud or dirt. They're laid in adobe that once again was taken from the site, mixed up, laid as a sort of mortar, and then you can see the remnants of the mud plaster there. So the rock to make an interior surface was mud plastered. And then sometimes there would be a thin layer of white lime plaster put over the mud, which is gone now. But once again, the finished interior of the structure itself was coming directly from the ground. No drywall, no lath and plaster, no wood paneling. So essentially zero cost. And if you can come around here, we will see the method of the roof construction, which tends to be extremely interesting to people. You've got this cross viga, which is a log, which is simply set into the stone wall. And in this instance, they did use hand-hewn board for it to rest upon. You don't always see that. Sometimes they lay it right on a flat rock. But in this case, they used that hand-hewn board. You can see how it was cut with an axe. Once again, a log from the site, just cut with an axe. This is laid in. Then they built the wall up around the viga, and then they go a foot and a half approximately above the viga, if you look up there, and that's the outer parapet wall. And then, as I said, they would cross these vigas. This stuff is the remains of what they called latillas, which were laid across the tops of the vigas, and on top of that there'd be about a foot of compacted adobe earth, which was the only roofing material of these structures. So essentially it's a fairly large home. You can see that way there was several rooms. Then there's a doorway here, and you can see that there was another considerable living quarters. So essentially you have what amounted to a home that may very well have contained 6, 8, or more people, and it was built directly from the site by a rather fascinating method. Of course, it's fallen into ruin, but that's really just because it was abandoned, because there's no electricity, no road access, and no running water in this site. People moved out of these places. But in places closer to utilities where they've been kept up, a lot of people around here are still living in modernized versions of these. So the method itself is very sound. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Just a little peek at a ruin on the range in New Mexico.